I want to jump in straight away with what's been on my mind since seeing the images of the toilets at Gatwick, which are which are unisex. And, I just wanted to talk about some of the things we know about safeguarding. And I did start to watch the Jimmy Savile um, drama, which I thought was very sensitive and included voices of victims. Although I don't really see any accountability, which is what I think we were all hoping to see, and I haven't yet seen any of that. But anyway, and I can't watch it actually. I just can't. I'm just not entertained. Um, and whilst there is, a lot of me who feels that I don't know what's happening to my. Hmm, I'm not going to be able to read any of your comments because for some reason it's not working. So whilst I'm curious as to how so many people were um, persuaded to turn a blind eye, or not even persuaded. So many people turned a blind eye. I don't really kind of need to watch it because I can see what's happening today, and we know what's happening. We know why it happens. We know how it happens. Um, I I think that we actually know, which hasn't been dramatized, but we actually know that there were nurses that knew what he was doing and said nothing, would warn the children and did nothing. We know that there were other people that sort of raised the alarm, but that's as far as it went. And maybe there's complicated reasons for that. I don't know. I think if I knew that something like that was going on, I would probably rather go to prison than continue to allow and enable the raping of children. But, that's just me. Um, so when it comes to, I'm just going to just going to see if I can see your chat. Yes, I can. Anyway, so I can't watch anymore. And but a few things have come up. But first of all, let me talk about Border Force. So years ago, when I first started doing this, when I first probably started being a bit of a public face, which was really, really early on for this mainstream thing that I believe I've had some part into making this mainstream, making this something talking about it, people talk about, even if some of the elites are still completely ignoring it or pretending they don't really know what's happening, which is, will neatly bring me back in a minute to Jimmy Savile. So a woman wrote to me years ago. She worked at Border Force. So that Border Force is like the entry into this country, where people have the right to search you, to pat you down, to ask you questions, to decide whether or not you come in or out of this country. And one of the things that they do, sweet water. One of the things that they do to ensure the people who doing the security aren't dodgy. One of the things they do is they have to walk through the metal protectors. Let me just say, this is new in store. If you want to if you want to get a sweatshirt, and this is such a nice color with the suffragette flag, you can. How lovely is that? This is actually a bit more green than it looks on the screen. It's a bit more green, but it's so lovely. And it's so warm. It's almost too warm for my office because my office is quite warm. Anyway, so there was this woman wrote and she said she didn't know what to do. And everyone was too embarrassed, too worried to deal with it because they would be accused of transphobia or some sort of prejudice. And this was, as I said, this was about 5 years ago. Might even be more than that. Might be more than 5 years ago, but I think it's 5 years ago, give or take. And one of the guys she worked with, who was a little bit senior to her, was a raging AGP. And what that raging AGP did is she didn't even think that he dressed like that all the time at home, but he insisted on wearing the women's uniform. And then what he would do is he would put tiny little bits of metal in his pockets or something, bits of metal or maybe coins or whatever it was, so that he was allowed, so that they would have to pat him down. Now, because he identifies as a woman, he had a female pat down, which is a flat palm to the front of the groin, as opposed to, I don't know what you do with men. Perhaps you don't touch their penis. I'm not a man. Um, anyway, so he would insist on this. So then female members of staff would have to pretend that they thought he was a woman, have to pretend that they didn't know that he had a penis, and they had to give him a pat down. And she knew he was doing it for kicks. She knew he was doing it because he found it sexually arousing. And I think that is the thing that's going on everywhere that people are turning a blind eye to, that I just don't get. So when it comes to safeguarding of children, Jimmy Savile, like the way he operated, according to this, and I think it's true, and I think it's the same as religious men who've managed to rape children and bypass normal scrutiny. The same as, well, he was a TV star, but even before he was a TV star, he was sort of well known and quite famous. And we've got to remember that victims weren't believed then. And I think still victims are made to feel like they won't be believed. And often, if we look at rape statistics, victims aren't believed. So, what Savile priests, other religious figures, sports coaches, who raped boys and girls, what they all relied upon was that they had enough power over those children and families and people around that nobody would ask questions. And as far as I'm concerned, that is exactly the same as some of the more creepy influencers, that they can, but what Savile could do is Savile could hide behind his persona and his infamy and his fame, and he could basically almost tell you to your face that he had a sexual interest in children and very young women. He could say that to your face, and he could do it in a way that it was so brazen that you would actually not believe that he was telling the truth. Now, that isn't the same for everyone, because some people knew the bloody truth. Some people knew it wasn't just a creepy guy, because we all know what a creepy guy feels like. Certainly one as creepy as Savile. I mean, many of us thought Jimmy Savile was creepy. Like, just even the cigar smoking and everything, and just he was just a creepy man. So I don't believe I don't believe that as many people didn't know about him as claim to not know about him. And I think that's the same as, I don't believe that anybody can watch Jeffrey Marsh, one of the creepiest of creepiest creeps I have ever come across, who basically says with his held in soft toned voice, which is deliberate and pausing for effect, and then he does like a broad beam with no twinkle and psychopathic eyes. I don't believe that anyone would think that he wasn't harmful if he didn't have eyeshadow on and call himself non-binary. If he was just a regular 40-year-old scrawny looking bloke, I think most people would have no problem whatsoever saying that he's creepy. If Dylan Mulvaney didn't pretend to be a silly uh a man who thought he was a woman. If Dylan Mulvaney just said the sort of things that he said about tampons and so on, but did it as a man, rather than someone who's pretending they're not a man, I think we'd all be happy enough to say that his behavior is creepy. If a man who was arrested for stalking a woman, just arrested for stalking a woman, um, I don't know if we'd be celebrating and putting him on a top 100 list of anything, let alone a top 100 list of women, has done in Maxim in Australia. So it's, I think we have to start using words like pervert, flasher. I don't particularly care that some people will try and shame you for it, because I personally think that they're enablers. And because of their attitudes and because of the way they pretend that anyone who's worried about paedophilia is alt right, because of that, because they don't understand at all the importance of boundaries. That's what we're talking about when we talk about groomer, when we talk about predatory pedophile, when we talk about sexually inappropriate behavior. We are talking about blurring the boundaries so that children don't understand what is right or wrong. Now, case in point, because so many boys have watched pornography and now young women have watched pornography, and now there's so much of it all over Twitter, OnlyFans, all over the internet, because it's in their vernacular, because pornographic terms are in their vernacular, because of someone like Madonna hobbling around on a stage, might do choking, might get her 11-year-old daughter up in thigh high boots. Because of those things, because of that gentle kind of eroding of boundaries and what's socially acceptable in society, you now have girls who think they can not lose their virginity. They will still have their virginity intact whilst they're having anal sex, even though, and they're guided by schools that anal sex is a normal part of sexual heterosexual couples. And I don't care if anybody thinks that there's some other something going on when we talk about anal sex, and we talk about that actually it's not in comparison to what gay men get from anal sex or what men from get from anal sex generally. Women just don't get it. And I'm sick and tired of everyone pretending that they do. And look, if it's in your repertoire of things that you like to do to please your partner, go you, have a great time. But it is now being sold as like a really sort of vanilla part of a normal sex life is actually to have anal sex or to be choked or to feel pain or to have not to feel pleasure, that sex is somehow is an ordeal, is a performance that girls have to give up for their boyfriends no matter what their boyfriends want, is normal sexuality, as opposed to sex being part of maybe a wider uh, reciprocal relationship. Anyway, so that's what I'm talking about. When we talk about eroding boundaries and grooming, it's not like we don't have a million different examples where we can show how that is the thing that happens when you start eroding boundaries. So at the moment, we've got girls sometimes having collapsed anal sphincters because they've had so much anal sex, like before they're 20 years old. So I just think it's really important, when you talk to your children about sex, and I hope that you do before school does. But when you talk to your children about sex, I think it's really important to say that actually it's a really amazing, wonderful, pleasurable thing. And it should feel like it's not being coerced. It should feel like it's a really enjoyable experience. And if it isn't a really enjoyable experience, you're doing it wrong. It shouldn't be an ordeal. It shouldn't be something you have to hold your breath and go through. It shouldn't be something that you have to pretend that you're not wincing in pain when you are. It shouldn't be something that you feel that you're surrendering a little bit of yourself or being like submissive in order for somebody else to have pleasure where you are not. And so I think it's really important when you talk about these things, because those sort of tiny little conversations where somebody just says that aloud, where it's not assumed that your children, as they're growing, I don't mean like 7-year olds, but as your children are growing up and they are going to be entering a world in which they will be having sex, I think it's really, really important that you make sure that you actually spell it out. You're going to have to use the words. You're going to have to use the word choking, I'm afraid. You're going to have to use the word anal, the words anal sex. You're going to have to use all sorts of things and talk about all sorts of things that you didn't think that you should, but you absolutely have to. But above all, in order to keep your daughter or son's boundaries, then you are going to have to remind them that sex is about pleasure and it's about connecting with another human being. Whether hopefully that's in a loving relationship. I'm not so stupid to think that it always will be, but hopefully it will be in a loving, respectful, consensual relationship. And if it's not, then that's another conversation. But you just have to talk about the central focus of sex is actually pleasure. It's not, and it's about your own pleasure and intimacy with someone else. Which it's tea time. Perhaps it's a little bit early for this. But I'm just saying that I think it's really important. Somebody says maybe I could write a guide. I don't know if that would be appropriate. I don't know if I'm such an expert, but I just these are the sort of boundaries that you help your children, and by children I mean the kids you actually you know that you have raised in your house, not necessarily little children, but as your children grow up, You're the only ones that really can give them this sort of information that doesn't come from a place of some sort of pornified, steeped in porn culture. And I think it's really important that you do that. And when you arm your offspring, maybe that's a better word. When you arm your offspring with these sorts of themes and narratives, you help them really find their own boundaries. And you help them with that by furnishing them with that information. I did want to talk about Border Force, so I've done that. And I did want to talk about safeguarding because I think um, Jimmy Savile should be the lessons that we all he that the fact that he got away with it, the fact that he died without anyone ever challenging him, without ever seeing inside a court of law, without any of his victims actually feeling that they got any sort of justice, that not even a painful death, I don't think. Um, and for his victims not to have had that closure, I think is absolutely horrendous. And we are inviting that sort of unchallenged predatory behavior repeatedly with LGBT. And I mean the whole spectrum of that. And I'm not accusing lesbians of anything. I'm just saying that that particular umbrella, what that does is it enables people to use that language to prevent them from being scrutinized. And they are not the only group by a country mile. But I think we need to be really, really clear that we are not cowed into challenging really devious behavior around children or vulnerable people just because that person claims to identify as LGBT. And I think we all know there isn't, the likelihood of an adult female who is a lesbian being a predatory pedophile is incredibly slim. It is probably one of the rarest crossovers of any sort of sexual identity or sexual orientation and predatory pedophilic behavior. So I'm certainly don't want to be wrongly accused of saying something lesbophobic because I think we're all very clear that women are not half as likely as men. But I think there are men claiming to be lesbians who I think probably are at the top of the list for the sort of man that can walk around this world with unfettered access to vulnerable women and girls. It will be those men. It won't be all of them. Not saying that straight men aren't just as likely. I'm just saying that if a straight man came into a place where a woman or girl expected privacy, there would be hell to pay. That's what I'm saying. If it was a regular bloke not pretending to be a woman, if it was one of those blokes, so maybe I should say regular bloke, not straight bloke, because I don't want to confuse. I don't wanna confuse, me saying straight versus gay. That's not what I mean. I mean, not part of, this cover of wearing women's clothing. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say. Mr. Cooper says, "Well, all those who knew about what Jimmy was up to should be convicted, surely." I think so. I think that if you know and you turn a blind eye, are you not an accomplice? If you work somewhere where you have a lock and key and you choose not to lock the door and he enters that place and he rapes vulnerable children, are you not an accomplice to his crime? If you hand over the keys, if you allow him access, if you warn children but you know he's still going to go in, if you're not in that room preventing that happening, are you not an accomplice? I think you probably are. Anyway, on that note, look, the way I do everything is ask you to be the billboard. This is a beautiful suffragette flag hoodie that it's just so nice and it's so soft. But anyway, um, if you can keep raising the alarm despite whatever accusation is going to be thrown at you for doing so, and let's face it, it's not just from terrible people, it's also from a lot of women on the left. If you can just ignore that and you can keep speaking up to what is right, then I promise we will win. If you cannot allow shame and the accusations and the castigations that you may face, whenever recognizing harm, especially to children, then I promise that we will win. And do you know why else we're going to win? aside from the fact that my merchandise is so incredible. Do you know why else we're going to win? Because I never lose. Anyway, Halloween shop's still open.